Hello everyone, this is Matt Phelan talking to you from my studio in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. I'd like to thank Children's Book World for inviting me here to celebrate Independence Bookstore Day and to talk about my most recent book, Knights versus the End of Everything, which I wrote 2 years ago before stuff happened. Anyway, I'm very thrilled to be here to talk about this new book. It is the third book in my trilogy. It started with Knights versus Dinosaurs and Knights versus Monsters. And for Knights versus the End of Everything, what I wanted to do was bring my knights and Mel back to Camelot. In the first book, they were in a world of dinosaurs that was conjured by Merlin. In the second book, they went to the Orkney Isles of Scotland and fought monsters. And for the third book, I wanted to bring them back to Camelot and bring in more of the traditional Arthurian legends. So we have a little bit of Merlin's actual legend in this story. There's a much bigger part for King Arthur. The Green Knight, which is a very famous character in Arthurian legend, is in the story. Because I grew up loving the King Arthur stories, and these are copies I had when I was a kid, like Howard Pyle's great version with all these wonderful ink drawings, and N.C. Wyeth, of course. Local people here in Pennsylvania know how important N.C. Wyeth is. If you don't, you should go out to the Brandywine River Museum and see for yourself. He's one of my favorite illustrators of all time. And of course his knight stories and his paintings for King Arthur are just amazing. So, Pyle, N.C. Wyeth, this is a copy of Gawain and the Green Knight. It's a very famous story that I've had since I was young. Always a story that I enjoyed a lot. And another big influence to me, of course, is this one, The Once and Future King by T.H. White. This is probably my favorite version of the Arthur legends. And it's also probably the first one where an author took the King Arthur legends and played with them. Where Merlin would talk about Adolf Hitler in World War II in the middle of the story. So he was the first one to kind of play with time and bending the rules of what Mallory had set up in the original most famous story of King Arthur's. And I guess I was doing a little of the same thing with my night stories, which are, irreverent comedies. They're action-adventure comedies. But I also wanted to have that root of the King Arthur legends in the story, and how much I do love the King Arthur stories. And I wanted to bring that back into my series with this final book of the trilogy, Knights versus the End of Everything. So, I want to show you guys some things about the making of the book and talk a little bit more detail what the book is about, and maybe do even a little drawing for you. So again, thank you, Children's Book World. You've been so important to me since the very beginning of my career. Hannah, Heather, and everybody who works there you're all the bee's knees. So thank you for inviting me to celebrate Independent Bookstore Day with you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about Knights versus the End of Everything. For this book, like I said, I wanted to bring it back to Camelot. And it kind of picks up where the second book ends. They're still looking for more gals, but Mel is continuing to learn from Merlin, and like I said, I wanted to bring in some of the classic Arthurian legends. Like, it opens with basically the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight story, but then it gets interrupted by our knights. But I love starting it in more of a traditional kind of way, and we get to meet some of the classic knights like Lancelot and Galahad and how they interact with our knights. So in this book, they wind up in the fairy realm. There's a fairy king that's a problem, and they get kicked out of the fairy realm very quickly. And then they can't find their way back in. One of the themes from this book was fighting something that you don't know how to fight. And for these guys, they don't know how to punch or stab it. In the first book, there were dinosaurs. In the second book, there were monsters. And in this book, it's a lot of things they're very frustrated about, that they can't quite get to it. They wind up with fighting ghosts, literally fighting ghosts, where they can't really punch a ghost. So this frustration is kind of going through the book, and an idea of where they have found themselves as they are themselves becoming legends. There's a bridge troll in it too. I love the bridge troll. moments like this, which are tie into the Arthur legend. And one of the things I always loved about these books, it gave me a chance to really kind of play with what a chapter book could be. So I can have these full spreads that are reminiscent of the picture book work I do, or I can have comics. In this book, sort of a comic sequence, we have a really long sequence where we finally get to see Magdalena the Black Knight do her thing, which in the previous books have often been sort of off screen, but in this one you really get to see her doing some fighting, which was a lot of fun. Ultimately, for me, those books, though, really are about the characters and where they've come since the first book, Knights versus Dinosaurs, and how they've grown together as friends and really as a family. I really enjoyed writing these books and love these characters very much, especially the character of Mel, who I find is kind of the central figure. I had a great time, of course, going for the last couple of years talking about Knights versus Dinosaurs, Knights versus Monsters, going to schools, and every kid had a great idea for what the Knights could be fighting for the third book versus, and I hope this third book makes those people happy. I hope they're happy with all the things that I put into this book, and I know there are going to be a lot of people that are happy that there finally actually is a dragon in this book. So we finally get the dragon that we were hoping to eventually see. And it leaves off, I think, with the Knights in a good place. There may be further adventures. Who can tell? But I hope you guys all enjoy Knights versus the End of Everything as much as I enjoyed making the book. I thought I'd give you all a little behind the scenes look. After I've written the story completely, I start sketching out what the illustration is going to be like. And I always work very loose in my thumbnail sketches. These are actually pretty large for me. And it's this phase that I really enjoy for the illustration, getting some ideas together of how frames in the book, or illustrations in the book, will finally turn out to be. And how they evolve. So here is Magdalena and Sir Morian facing off in an initial drawing, and when I get to the final book, it became a little bit more dramatic a layout. But it always starts somewhere. So sometimes it starts quiet, ends up a little bit more dynamic. Sometimes it starts out dynamic and ends up a little bit quiet. Depends on what the mood of the scene is and the tone of the story in that particular moment. So all the drawings start out very loose. Then I would draw them again. A little bit more detail. There's Sir Hector and Mel. And then Knights versus the End, just like Knights versus the Monsters were digitally inked, which is a kind of a first for me on Knights versus Monsters. But I always drew it first, worked from pencil, and then did the final inking digitally. So I do have all these pencil drawings, which for me are really the fun part. This is where I'm making all the decisions. This is where the book starts to really come to life for me. And here's a puppet show. There's a puppet show in this book, which might be my favorite part in the entire book. They run across a little town, and there's a Punch and Judy show going on, and the play is obviously based on their exploits, and it's not as flattering as they maybe have hoped. And just putting a Punch and Judy show into the book was one of the pure joys for me. So that's some of the artwork for Knights versus the End of Everything. All right, let's draw boars from the Knights versus Dinosaurs, Knights versus Monster, Knights versus the End of Everything books. Boars is a lot of fun to draw. Probably my favorite knight to draw because he's so grumpy, not so bright. When I draw boars, I usually kind of start with a pencil like this and just get sort of basic shapes of where things are going to be. Not too much detail, but a little bit of stuff, because a lot of fun with drawing with boars is using a big marker to get these big thick lines. There we go. So the kind of marker I use is this. It's a Japanese brush marker, means it's got a nice soft tip like a brush. And using this little pencil drawing as my guide, I'm going to start putting in the details of boars. What's cool about the pencil drawing is it's a guide. It really isn't, I'm not stuck with it, because you want to have some freedom to make decisions while you're drawing. Keep it fun. Keep the line having some energy to it. Big old mustache. Thick chin. See how it comes around. He always has a couple straggly hairs up there. Put in whatever chainmail armor you want. Chainmail's fun. You just do little circles like that. It kind of gives you the idea. That's a little bit. Gives you the impression of chainmail. You don't have to draw every single one. And there is boars. All right. Have fun. Keep drawing. Keep reading. Keep making up stories.